with us on this webinar. Welcome. I hope you're going to enjoy and learn a few new things about qualitative research. And Dr. Lisa LaRue is going to speak on the basics. I leave it to herself to introduce herself and see what wisdom she can give us. My name's Hela Marie. I'm the faculty librarian at Theology, and my colleague Alvina Mathieu from the Health Sciences. We will co-chair the session. If you have any questions or you want to, you're welcome to use the chat function or raise your hands. So over to you, Lisa.
Hi, everyone. So I see there are no videos on, so I shall be speaking into the void. But thank you for this opportunity. So my name is Lisa LaRue. I'm a research director at the Unit for Religion and Development Research, and we're a third stream funded consultancy research unit based within Stellenbosch University. What this means is we do consultancy research all over the world for UN agencies, for government departments, for FBOs, for NGOs, for development networks. I'm a sociologist by training, and I work at what I kind of call the intersection, this triangle between religion, culture, and violence, and specifically gender-based violence. Because of this work that I do a lot of empirical research and a lot of qualitative empirical research, mostly in conflict-affected settings where there's currently war or recently had been war. And I do a lot of work with survivors of violence, various forms of violence. So I think I'm giving you this background because it plays a role in what I will be talking about today. 600 page books are being written about qualitative research, and now we're supposed to do an hour-and-a-half webinar on it. So we'll be including some things, discussing some things, but I'll be touching only on certain points. I can't cover everything. So I'll mostly be, I think, speaking to what I see as key principles of qualitative research, and then, of course, also things that I've experienced with. Yes, the idea is, let me look at my notes. We'll stop. My aim is to stop about 15 minutes before, so at about 3, that for any questions in the chat box or, any specific things that you want to bring up. But please also feel free to raise your hand while I'm speaking. Like, I have no problem with stopping, and, especially if we're busy talking about something, it might be better to ask the question then. I just ask Kayla then if you can, because if I'm sharing my screen, I might not see a hand go up. So then just speak out and make me stop, please. Okay, so I'm going to start sharing my screen. Again, Ayla, if you can just tell me if, am I sharing?
You're sharing it's okay, and I'll guide you through the way if we don't see anything.
Okay, and you're seeing the presentation, like not the presenter mode, the audience view, like it's showing the whole.
Yes, I do see you. I do see
excellent.
that.
Okay, so let me just move there. Okay, so I'm just getting everything up. Sorry, everyone. Moving between 2 screens. So just to make clear our focus today, we're talking about qualitative research. Now, quantitative studies require specific data collection methods. So these methods include compiling numerical data. So it's about numbers to test the causal relationships between different variables. So quantitative data collection would be experiments or questionnaires or surveys or database reports, but methods that lend themselves to numerical analysis. So that's quantitative research. We are looking today at qualitative research. Um, Now, qualitative research is all about human action, what people do from the perspective of the people themselves. So your key goal with qualitative research is describing and understanding rather than explaining. So within this whole body of qualitative research, you have different techniques and methods and designs, but they all kind of tie together with this idea of describing and understanding. Now you have different qualitative research designs and different kinds of qualitative data collection methods. We'll touch on some of them today, but not all of them. So how is qual different from quant? Now, qualitative research is all about being in the natural setting of the social actor. So we go to the space, we want the context, and we engage there. And the focus is on the process. So how we collect the data is a big deal in qualitative research. And the insider perspective, so the person you're speaking to or engaging with, their perspective is really emphasized, rather than this idea of a universal perspective or a general perspective. This specificity is a big deal in qualitative research. So as I said, the primary aim is description and understanding. And you want to understand that social actor, that person you're engaging with, in terms of their specific context, so where they find themselves. You're not taking them away from that, kind of with this perspective of how context plays a key role in what we think and do and believe. Um, so we're fine with that specificity rather than this kind of, our aim is not to theorize to this general person, a theoretical population that applies to all. And then qualitative research is very often inductive in approach. So it leads to this generation of new hypotheses and new theories. So if we think now about what I just said, I think it becomes really clear that qualitative research has a strongly interpretivist approach. So interpretivism is a philosophical position and a research method that analyzes events in society based on a specific value system of the society or the culture in which they happen. So it's a qualitative. Sorry? Okay. Um, is did someone accidentally unmute, or is that a question that I'm not hearing? I think someone accidentally unmuted. Okay, so so interpretivism we really associate with qualitative research, whereas, for example, positivism we really associate with quantitative research. Now, but at the same time, qualitative research doesn't necessarily have to be interpretivist. It could be qualitative research, for example, in information systems can follow a paradigm of pragmatism. So it's not inherently that way, but we do tend to associate the two. This is all kind of as a bit of a background. So qualitative research is the big circle. Now, if we start thinking about research designs and qualitative research designs. So a research design, the term refers to your overall strategy and your analytical approach that you choose to make sure that all the different things that you do as part of your research kind of fits together in a logical and a coherent way. So, so the idea is that you don't just randomly select different research methods and kind of stick them together, but that there's an underlying logic of why you use these methods, why you analyze them in a certain way, why you disseminate them in a certain way, how you interpret your data. So that's your research design. So I mean, to give a very um, random example, if I do interviews with 15 men who are in jail for murder, and I record those interviews, and then I just go and count the number of times that they say the word dad or father. And based on that, I make an argument that bad male role models is the cause of all murder. So, my data analysis method uh, my doesn't fit my data collection method, and also doesn't fit my research question. So your research design helps you to kind of give you a clear line, a golden thread that ties all of this logically together. um, Now different scholars, they group research designs together in different ways. So if you read different books, some say that there are 5 key qualitative research designs. Some say there are 9. Barbie and Maton, that's used a lot at Stellenbosch University, they've, just like an example, they discuss participatory action research as a standalone research design, whereas you'll see others discuss it as part of qualitative research designs. So I mean, I don't think you should get stuck on, oh, there are just 5 or there are just 7, um, but rather go and explore these different research designs and see what fits your research questions and your discipline. Now, yes, I'm just kind of checking the slide again. So what on this slide, you'll see what we most typically see as qualitative research designs. These are the ones that are most typically identified in your handbooks and various books on qualitative research. So I always struggle to say this, phenomenological studies, phenomenological studies. So they're all about, again, examining human experiences, but through the description of the people involved, the people who live it. So phenomenological designs are all about lived experiences, and you'll see that in the methods that they use, very often that kind of language. Um, so the goal of this kind of study and this kind of design is describing the meaning making that certain experiences hold for people. Then ethnographic studies. So this is where it kind of involves the collection and analysis of data about cultural groups. And we see this often in anthropology. The researcher frequently lives with the people belonging to the cultural group that they're studying, and becomes a part of it as much as possible, and kind of exploring their rituals and customs. Grounded theory. Um, so grounded theory is a very systematic procedure of data analysis, and we see this used in various disciplines and fields. So, but it's very much focused around how you analyze your data, um, that you build a theory, develop a theory from the data up. Um, Okay, I won't go into more detail there. Historical studies, they're about the identification and location and evaluation and synthesis of data from the past. But it's not just about discovering these events from the past, but also relating it to the present and to the future. Now, case study design. So it's an in-depth examination again of people and groups of people. But with case study research, the researcher, you kind of want to focus on the how and the why of what you're observing, to really understand that phenomenon. And with case study research, I've used this design a lot. You try and use different research methods, different ways of gathering data, to kind of build that picture out a lot more. Then action research studies, so participatory action research would fall under this, for some theorists organize it that kind of way. With action research studies, this is very popular in South Africa and in any country that has a strong development focus. Um, uh, the idea is here that your research, your qualitative research already seeks action. The research itself is action already, and then you study the effects of the action. So your implementation of solutions um, is part of the research process. There's no, oh, we're studying what will work and then we design the intervention and then we go and implement it. It's all integrated, and the learning happens in the doing. And then narrative inquiry, let me look at the time. Yes, narrative inquiry is about recording the experiences of individual or smaller groups. Again, that focus on lived experience, but with narrative inquiry, there's quite a focus on the chronological narrative and the recording and the ordering of that. So kind of this idea of life history and biography. And we see a lot of this now uh, in the in research around First Nations, for example. Okay, so these are like super brief overviews, and I mean, books are written on just one of these research designs. But what I'm hoping that you're kind of getting while you just listen to these brief descriptions is that certain disciplines lend themselves more towards certain research design. So the type of questions you ask in your research, that should guide you in determining the research designs that you use. Let me go to the next slide. Okay, now qualitative research methods. There are so many, and this is one of the most fun things that I find. I love doing qualitative research. I find it so interesting and constantly evolving, especially with the arts-based methods that have really in the last 10 to 15 years exploded quite a bit. So on the slide, it's just a few random examples. But honestly, we constantly see new ones evolve, and I would say they're more like adaptations of existing ones, but especially in the light of technological advances, we really see some great stuff happening in qualitative research methods. Maybe a couple of things that I want to highlight, just kind of general thoughts. Um, in choosing your research methods, you choose and you use what's most appropriate to your research question, your research design, and your research population. So it's not just about what's easy for you, or what you can get through ethical clearance the fastest. But you really need to think about what suits your research question and design, but also the population that you engage with. So again, random made up examples. If you're studying how toddlers, like how 3-year-olds make friends, you won't use nominal groups because nominal groups require participants to be able to read and to write. They need to think independently. There's a voting process, there's a discussion process. So, I mean, working with 3-year-olds and something like this, you might lean more towards observation, or you could develop some kind of hybrid of observation and transect walks where you accompany a toddler as he walks from his classroom to the playground and then kind of observe what he does, and then you can, while he's, I don't know, playing on the seesaw or whatever, ask him questions about what he's doing. So you know you don't have to be stuck in implementing one method exactly in that way, and then the second one, you can merge these things to really work with the population that you're doing research with. Hayla, I'm seeing these pop-ups, but then just like one line with a question or something. Please, I can't see the questions properly. If I need to stop and some questions need to be flagged, just just tell me, just speak out so that
Okay,
I stop,
Lisa,
please.
there is a
Mm,
question. Is the thematic analysis a research
mhm.
design or a method? If the latter, under which research design does it fall?
So thematic analysis, we're going to be getting to that when we talk about different ways of analyzing your data. So thematic analysis is all about how you take the data that you can collect in different ways, using different research designs, using different methods, but how you actually analyze that data. So I use thematic analysis a lot, a lot, a lot. And I've used it with various research designs and with various research methods. So if we can pause and then we'll get to that, please. Okay,
Thank you. Thank you.
thanks, Ayla. Um, okay, so um, the other kind of general thing that I wanted to flag in thinking about research methods um, is that these qualitative methods, and again, these are only a few on this slide, um, you can use them in different qualitative research designs. So, for example, interviews can be part of case studies. You can do interviews and narrative inquiries. You can do it in phenomenological studies. Um, so don't think, oh, a certain design you can only use a certain method. They kind of they can. It's like little puzzle pieces that can go in very many different spaces. Um, That being said, there are two qualitative methods that are really just used most often, and those are interviews and focus groups. And especially with graduate level research, where people need to get their degrees done and have lots of people sign off on their methods and how they use it, interviews and focus groups are used so much, and I use them a lot myself, and I'm pretty sure I'll never stop using them. It's kind of like they're the basics, the staple food of qualitative research, and the skills that you learn by learning to do interviews and focus groups well really serve you in using these other qualitative methods as well. Now, the ad for this webinar had said that we will be discussing how to do qualitative interviews. So we're going to be focusing on that because we just don't have time to go into focus groups as well. So we'll be focusing on qualitative interviews. Um, Now, again, we only have an hour and a half for this webinar, and we could really spend a day just talking about the different kinds of interviews. So bear with me, please. I'm kind of gonna try and give you a broad overview of different kinds of interviews, but then get really practical around if you're doing interviews, how to do them in a way that you connect well and you get the kind of data that you need. Okay, let me start changing up the slides. Okay, so interviews. Um, Now, there are three main kinds of interviews: structured interviews, unstructured interviews, and semi-structured interviews. Now, with structured interviews, it's not rocket science. You can see it in the name. You have a set of questions. It's a list, and you're working through it. So, in 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 many ways, it's kind of like a interviewer administered questionnaire, but you're not having close-ended questions, you're having open-ended questions. So you're not asking, are you hungry? Yes or no. You're asking, tell me about the foods that you like to eat. But you have that structure and you're just working through it. So you're not flexible. Now, the big positive about a structured questionnaire is it's easy to administer. So if this is your first time doing something like this, it gives you such a nice framework that you just follow and you get it done. And that's quite lovely. The downside is that it's quite limited in scope. And if you're working on complex, textured, sensitive topics, then this can become very limiting and almost make the interview quite stilted. So, for example, I do a lot of research with survivors of sexual violence, where you need that connection in order for someone to be able to speak about experiences that have been very hard for them. So, kind of just working through a list will not work. You need to have that flexibility to kind of flow where the person that you're interviewing kind of needs that flow to go. It sounds very woo-woo, I realize. But yes, let's move on to the next one. So unstructured interviews, it's the other extreme. So it's open. So you have no predetermined or hypothesis-based questions. So you're like, so let's use the food example. You're going into that interview and you're like, okay, so today we're talking about food. I just want to hear whatever you're thinking about food. It's very, very, very open and flexible. And it allows you to kind of really dig and go wherever. So, if this food interview and the person just says, oh, I hate society's obsession with food, and then you go with that and you explain what you're asking, so what do you mean by obsession, and and you kind of run with that, whereas someone else would be, oh, I never eat enough, and then it goes into their eating habits and why they feel they don't eat enough. So that unstructuredness allows you to really respond to what the person that you're interviewing, what they're thinking and their opinions. The flip side is it might be miles removed from your research question and what you're actually looking for data on. Then semi-structured. Honestly, this is where I think a lot of you and a lot of us, where we kind of end up, is that it's a hybrid. You have a structure, but you are allowing it to kind of flow a bit, and you can change the order and you might adapt a question slightly depending on how a person responded to a previous question. So you allow them to kind of go off track and then you kind of bring them back towards what you're actually wanting to discuss. So it has structure, but it also has freedom. Again, so I use this a lot. I think if you've never done interviews before, if you're really new to doing research, a quite structured interview guide is just easier to administer. But again, it depends on your topic and what you are investigating. Now, what is important for interviews? So for any of these kinds of interviews, but really the things that we'll be discussing now, it's important to any kind of engagement with people when you're trying to get research data. So if it's an interview or a focus group or observation or anything, if you're engaging with people, I do think if you're engaging with people to do research, these principles are important. Okay, so I'm gonna start by sharing a video with you of an interview, of a really bad interview. It's gonna be, just gonna be about a minute and a half, I think. I'm gonna play, Hayla, I think I did remember to share sound, but when I get it started, just tell me, since I can't hear on my side. Just moving it to the right spot.
Yes.
Okay.
All good on my side.
Okay.
Hello, Amanda.
Hi.
Come in. Come in. Sit down. Thanks for coming to talk to me today. How long have you been driving, Amanda?
13 years.
Right. And what's driving like for you?
Usually I enjoy it, but sometimes it's stressful.
Right.
Just a quick pause. I want you to kind of follow your screen. Don't just listen to what they're saying. Really, please kind of look at the body language, kind of how they're engaging with each other in this room, please.
Okay. And what was it like learning to drive, and how long did it take you?
Learning to drive was nerve-wracking.
And was it stressful taking your test?
Yeah, it was stressful. I was really nervous.
Right. Okay. Thanks for talking to me today, Amanda.
Now let's see that again.
Hello, Amanda.
Hi.
Come in.
Wait, did it now jump weirdly, or is it just done? I don't know the sound. Sorry, Ayla.
No, it's done.
Okay.
Yeah, it's ended with let's look at it again.
Okay. So I'm gonna. Oh, I'm sorry, people. Just be patient. That wasn't supposed to happen. On current slide. Play settings. So what are you seeing on at the moment? Are you seeing the presenter mode or the? Oh no, this isn't supposed to play.
We're
Are
not
you?
seeing your screen right now.
Oh, okay, sorry. Let
You
me
need to share again.
Okay, sorry everyone. Okay.
There it goes.
Does it show venue? Is that
Venue,
what you're seeing?
yes.
Okay,
That's what we're
excellent.
seeing.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so venue, and again, we're talking about interviews, but this really does apply more broadly with other research methods as well. It's really important that both of you must be comfortable in this space. Now, usually, I mean, key things are privacy, so other people shouldn't be able to hear. There should be as little interruption as possible. And we often tend to think, okay, so we need to find a room that is closed with a closed door, but it really does depend on your context. So, for example, I did research in Liberia, very, very rural areas in Liberia. And the organization that I was doing the research with organized a room that I could do the interviews in. But it was incredibly, incredibly, incredibly hot. So bad. So in the end, I spent 3 days that we found there was a big tree outside, but there wasn't like a footpath with people walking close by. Everyone stayed far away, and we ended up doing everything outside because it was more comfortable for both of us, and for that space to be outside than to be in the typical what we would consider the best setting for an interview. So I really kind of want to challenge you to think. Don't just think, okay, a room with a door that can be closed, but really think about what makes people comfortable in a space. If it's a closed room, but you can constantly hear people running outside, and eh, those kinds of disruptions are also things to take into consideration. Big thing about venue is also what you bring into that space, and that is your cell phone. And honestly, I think oftentimes we record on our cell phones, or we use it as our watch to see how long the interview has been going on. But I mean, in research around cell phone use and how people respond to cell phones really proves this. The moment you as an interviewer look at your phone, the person that you're interviewing feels that you're distracted. So it might just be that you're looking to see what the time is, but the person that you're interviewing feels that you're checking your phone for messages or something else. So this is actually something that all research assistants that I work with or co-research that I work with, this is something very important. A cell phone shouldn't be visible, and it shouldn't be vibrating in a bag either. You kind of need to kind of respect that space. Then
Lisa,
about,
there's
yeah,
there's a
yeah.
few questions.
Okay,
How,
please.
okay, the first one, how does a theoretical framework or lens fit into qualitative research? Is it a prerequisite for qualitative research?
Okay, so I'm wondering if we can pause that to the end, if that's okay,
Okay,
because that's kind of a general thing to discuss. It's not
okay,
specifically about where we're at in terms of interviews at the
okay.
moment. So if we can pause that.
There's another one. There's another one. Is it okay to ask leading questions? And the
Ooh,
other question is about online interviews. Are there any considerations, or are they basically the same as a person-to-person one?
oh, these are excellent questions. And I'm going to pause. We'll discuss body language just now. Is it okay to ask leading questions? It really depends on your research question. So what your study is about, it also depends on your power dynamic with the person that you're interviewing. So what I have experienced with some research that I've done, to ask a leading question is a great way to actually get a person to respond um, with their actual beliefs and opinions and experiences. So for example, so I'm interviewing someone in SIDA, that's a Swedish development agency. And I would say, so instead of asking, do you think civil society, space for civil society is shrinking? I would say, um, so we can really see in Sweden how the space for civil society is shrinking, and that's really worrisome. So do you see kind of I mean, these are made up questions, but do you see the difference in how I ask those questions? And having that kind of leading question um, can elicit much more of a open and honest answer. Um, but I would be very careful how I use it. If I'm interviewing someone where there is a power disparity, so I'm coming in as an external researcher and with a group of refugee women from Sudan, there's a big power disparity there. And so if I make a leading statement or ask a leading question, it could just be, okay, well, she's clearly the researcher from somewhere else, so she'll know and I'll just agree. So I would be careful with that. But it can be an interesting way to get people to actually speak out, especially with focus groups. It can sometimes be very effective for getting that discussion between the different focus group participants going. Um, then about online key informant interviews. Um, so I've used them a lot. Uh, Not really before COVID, but during COVID a lot. And it's kind of like the space just changed after COVID. So I'm still using them a lot. Also, I work internationally quite a bit, so you just can't travel that much. Um, Again, I would, if you do it with video, I mean, I've been doing it a lot, and I must say it's gotten to the point where I'm very comfortable with it, and I think it's more or less the same, but it depends again on the subject matter. So I would still not be, if I am interviewing vulnerable groups about their issue of marginalization. So if I'm speaking with sexual violence survivors about their experiences of trauma and lack of care after what happened to them, I wouldn't do that online, just because of the disconnect there. That's I don't think it's ethical in that kind of way. But civil society, if I'm doing interviews with human rights defenders, then I would say yes, it's the same kind of dynamic doing it online. But I must admit, I've never interviewed without a video. That's kind of a prerequisite, because otherwise just so much gets lost, especially if we're not working, if either or both of us are not working in our primary language. So yes, but yes, I hope that's a quick response to the idea of online key informant interviews. Maybe a last thought just around that. I think if you do the online key informant interviews, you need to take special care around your consent form, your communication around ethics, and support around that to make sure all of that is in place just because you have that physical distance. Okay,
Thanks,
Kayla,
Lisa. There is
can I move on?
Mr.
Oh, okay.
Mkamba has put his hand up. He needs to ask you a
Yeah,
question. You can go
yeah,
on.
yeah. My question on place for interview and devices. On the place you talk about a room, you may do it in the room or you can do outside sometimes. My
Mm,
concern is about recording devices. If you do interview outside, maybe it's focus group,
mm,
or even if you one-to-one interview, don't you think that will be some interference with wind and noises due in that record?
mm,
And my question on
Shoot.
recording device is use of mobile phone allowed instead of recorder? Because recorder sometimes is expensive, but
mm,
mobile phone is rarely available. But
mm,
I know it's merit that it can interfere by message calling, but you can also
mm.
put maybe a mobile aeroplane mode so that can you say something about that?
Mm, mm. Thank you, Ms. Mkamb. I think those are good questions. So, around the issue of sound interference when you're outside, you're right. It will totally depend on your context. So, um, I've done a lot of outside interviews, simply also because that's in some settings the only way to get privacy. Um, and and what I tend to do, I tend to put my recording device close to the person that's speaking, not close to myself, because I can kind of figure out what I'm, because I said it, I can, when I listen, can hear what I'm saying because it's my voice. You know, you pick up your own accent and you remember what you said. So it's something around the movement, or the placement, sorry, of the device. Also, you get kind of great recording devices. Like I have a kind of a special mic thingy for when it's focus groups that can do multi-directional, really pick up sound. But remember, I do this for a living, so it's different for me to buy this kind of equipment. And you're right, it's expensive. Um, so again, being outside, you need to check and see what works. But I mean, I've had interviews that I did inside. This was in Rwanda, and it started raining. I was doing interviews in a church because it was the only building in the community that was a community space. And it started raining, and then that evening when I listened to the interviews, you couldn't hear anything because the rain was so loud on the roof. So I didn't have any of those recordings. So I think as much as possible, just test beforehand so that you can be sure about your recording. Then about the issue of using your phone. So I totally hear what you're saying. You know, if you have a phone and all phones record well, why go through the expense of getting another recording device? Um, for me, that's quite important. Just to remove phones from that space. Again, I think I am formed, the strength of this opinion that I have is formed because I work so much with survivors and incredibly marginalized and vulnerable populations. So there's something that I really try to create in the space. So I think I'm oversensitive maybe to that. But I totally also understand that we just don't always have money to buy extra devices. So what I would suggest is then to tell the person, I'm putting my phone now on flight mode. It's just a recording device. And to put it somewhere, but if you can actually try and not make it visible. So, um, I mean, we always say don't sit with a table between you and the other person, you know. So say it's a side table there. To put it there and even, I don't know, put a piece of paper over it or something that doesn't interfere with the recording quality, but that doesn't make the phone visible. So really the research around this, if we see a phone, how we get distracted, both you and the other person, and what that says about the space. But I clearly have issues around this, but the strength of my feeling about this. So definitely you can use phones, but if you use a phone, it needs to be in airplane mode. You cannot get calls or reminders or alarms that go off. It's so incredibly disrespectful. And you're in a position already, usually of power, in relation to the person that you're interviewing. Okay, Hayla, can I move on?
Yes, you can move on. I will,
Okay.
we can do the other questions later.
Okay, I'm gonna try and speed up a bit now. Okay, just about body language, that video that we just watched, I really hope that you kind of picked up on it was the most awkward thing between those two women. Your body language is so important in terms of the quality of your interview, even if you're not interviewing about sensitive stuff. So you never directly sit facing a person. You always do that because that's very confrontational. You always do that slight tilt. Don't sit with a table so we're sitting, you know, across from a table from each other, because again, it creates the distance. Sit to the side of the table and then face each other, kind of side on. Making eye contact, kind of doing those verbal and non-verbal cues as the person is telling you something. Again, with that interview, the interviewer was just kind of looking down at their list the whole time. You don't yawn, you don't check your cell phone, you don't look away, you don't look bored. Your body language is just so important in terms of showing that you're giving all of your attention and that what this person is sharing with you is of value to you, and that you find it interesting. You know, it's so important to the quality of the data that you get. But also, I think there's integrity to the research process. If we do it that way, this person is sharing their time and their thoughts and sometimes very intimate experiences with you. So introducing yourself, and this sounds so silly, but how you start that interview by introducing yourself really sets the tone for the interview around how serious the person takes this, uh, how honest they feel they can be. And again, so this is really important for the quality of the data that you get. So they must feel that they can be open and honest and that they can trust you and that they can be honest about these things that they think or feel or have experienced. So you need to think about how you explain who you are, how you explain the research, but it's also in the message that you send by how you're dressed, you know, your body language. Yes, like I'm trying to explain, like if I ever, whenever I do research, I would never say, "Hi, I'm Dr. LaRue." I would always say, "Hi, I'm Lisa." Um, because of power dynamics. It really is a massive issue. I wouldn't say I'm here because I'm doing research with sexual violence survivors to find out about their experiences of healthcare systems. I would say I'm here to talk with women who have had traumatic experiences during the war, and have engaged with clinics or hospitals just to talk about how they experienced those times that they were at the clinic or the hospital. I hope that you're kind of getting what I'm getting at. Okay, I'm moving on because time. During the interview, again, people listen, don't bulldoze. And I think, you know, you have your research questions and you have, oh, I need to get my degree and I need them to answer this. But it's so important to let people talk. It's a fine line because you don't want them to go totally off topic. But if a person slightly goes off topic and you kind of slam them back and say, no, we're talking about this, it makes people uncomfortable and then they don't feel like they can really share. So really allow the conversation to evolve and develop. And remember they're doing you a favor. You're not doing them a favor. So be polite and remember that. Use the probe. So sometimes you may ask a question and they would totally not answer the question. Then don't be like, okay, well, that's not what I asked. What I asked was da da da. Then think of a new way of asking it and just ask it again. Explain the questions if it's clear someone doesn't understand. If you're making notes, write notes that you can actually read. And if a person kind of gives inconsistent information, so they'll say, no, I never went to hospital. And 10 minutes later, they say, well, the second time I went to the hospital, this happened. Don't be like, but wait, you just said you never went to the hospital. Find a gentle way of probing for inconsistencies. Yes. So it's very much like being a good conversationalist, just being a polite, kind person to talk to. Okay, I'm moving on. What? Sorry, this moves. So after the interview, thank them for their participation. If you have a very set question list, just kind of check through those questions again, because sometimes we lose track and we might forget to ask something. Remind them again that you'll keep everything in confidence, that they will remain anonymous if those are things that is part of your ethics and that you promised during the consent process. And then you thank them again. Like you cannot thank people enough. Kind of rushing through this. Okay, so I'm again going to play that interview, but this time it's going to be the same two people talking about the same thing, but now they're taking these things that we just discussed. Now they're taking that into consideration. Now the better interview is almost 10 minutes long. So I'm going to kind of stop it after a little bit, but we're just going to watch. Let me just move it on. 8:10. And again, check the screen because you'll see notes at the bottom. Please. Ayla, just tell me if you're not hearing the
Yes,
sound.
I can't hear the sound now.
I think I forgot when I reshared share sound.
Just try it again. No, it's not coming through. But I think we can look at the body language. We cannot hear the sound at the moment, but we can see the body language has changed in the video. Lisa, the video has stopped.
Ella,
Yeah.
Lisa's muted.
Okay.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you now. Your
Okay.
video has stopped.
Okay, so I'm gonna play it now again. I think something went wrong with my headset when I tried to find the sound. So just, can you hear?
Not yet.
Yeah, see now I can hear it. Okay, guys, we'll just give it one more go, and then if it doesn't work, then
before in the participant information sheet. The reason that I've asked you is
It's coming
because I'm
through
aware
now.
that you're a driver, and I wanted to find out a little bit more about what your own personal experience of learning to drive has been about. Now, I'm not expecting the interview to last very long, probably only about 10 minutes or so. And I just need to check out a few things with you before you get started. I know that when we spoke earlier, you agreed to take part in the interview, but I just want to check that that's still okay with you.
Yes, it's fine.
Great, that's brilliant. Now, it's important to let you know that if you want to stop at any time or you want to take a break, you can. And if I was to ask you a question that you didn't want to answer, please feel free to just say, I'm sorry, I don't want to talk about that. That's absolutely fine.
Okay.
And as we agreed earlier, the whole purpose of using this interview will be for the research, but also to use the interview for teaching purposes. Can I just check that's
That's
okay?
fine.
Lovely, thanks. Do you have any questions for me before we get started?
No, I think I'm happy, yeah.
Okay, right, that's lovely then. Okay. Can you tell me how long you've been driving?
I've been driving for 13 years.
Right, gosh, 13 years, okay. And can you tell me something about the feelings that you associate with driving?
I think mainly when I'm driving, I really enjoy the freedom that I can just go where I want, when I want. And although it can be stressful when you get stuck in traffic, but when you go on public transport, you're very much waiting around and it can not turn up, and that's really frustrating.
Right.
So I really like the freedom that it gives me.
You mentioned there about stress and it feeling stressful. Can you perhaps give me a bit of an example or tell me about a time when...
Just like when you can
stressful?
get stuck behind someone who's really slow, or there's a really bad traffic and there's nothing you can do, you're just stuck there and it can make you late, but you can't do anything, you just have to wait till the traffic moves on. That can be annoying.
Right, okay, that's great, thanks. One of the things that I'm particularly interested in finding out about are people's memories of their experiences. And in particular, the sort of stories that people tell of events that might happen to them or their experiences of certain times in their lives. And I particularly want to ask you about that in relation to your driving behaviour. What I'd like to ask you to do is to think back to a specific point in time when you were learning to drive.
Right.
Maybe a specific experience or maybe a particular lesson. And tell me a little bit about that.
Well, I can remember when I was learning to drive, in my car, but my mum had lent it to a friend because obviously I couldn't drive it on the road at the time. And so the deal was that they took me out for practice every week and they got to borrow the car.
Right.
Of course it caused a bit of a clash of interest because it wasn't in their interest for me to pass my test because then they'd have to give the car back.
Right.
So when I was learning to drive, it made it a bit uncomfortable because I was kind of aware of that, and I felt sometimes he was a bit undermining of my driving rather than encouraging.
Okay, I'm gonna move on now. Hayla, you are hearing me.
Yes, I'm hearing
Okay.
you.
Okay. Sorry if the sound's now different, but I'm now on my my laptop sound. And okay, so I hope that you saw the difference with that session, and especially as it developed, how much more comfortable the lady in black became, and that's good interviewing. So okay, I'm a bit conscious of time, so I'm gonna be hurrying up now to get through everything that I wanted to do. so if we're moving on now from interviews and we're now thinking about the data, so if you've done your interviews, you've now collected your data, you have to get to the point where you can analyze it. So ideally with an interview, you'll transcribe it so you can do it yourself. So you listen and then you just type up what you hear. There are different, so they're like voice to text transcription software, but they're not 100% accurate. So even if you do online interviews and Teams and the transcribes, it's really not 100% accurate. So you need to check quite carefully. There's also great software that if you're listening and typing, transcribing, that allows you to easily pause the audio, that your hands don't have to leave the keyboard. The average time estimate, if you're an amateur, you're not a transcriber as a profession, you should kind of estimate that it'll take you 6 hours to transcribe 1 hour's worth of audio. But that, of course, depends on the quality of the audio, how fast a person speaks. And then if you're transcribing focus groups, it takes longer because you have to move between the different speakers. You can also get someone else to transcribe it. But the big mistake that people make is that they don't budget enough time for transcription. Then other people just take notes during the interview and then they analyze the notes. I would strongly advise, especially if you're doing this for the first time, and especially if you're doing this for degree purposes, to actually record and transcribe, because so few people take notes comprehensively enough, and then you miss out on so much of the texture data. So now getting to qualitative data analysis. So we spent quite some time talking now about the practicalities of doing interviews and getting that interview data to the point where you can analyze it. So now we're going to change gears a bit and talk about qualitative data analysis. So now this is no longer just interview data. This applies to, focus group data, also data that you use that you get by using other methods. Now this analysis of qualitative data, usually people are like, oh, this is terrible. It's so much easier, just quant data that you can put into a system, and Excel gives you everything that you need, or you use R, or you use Stata. Kind of the reason why some people find qualitative data analysis difficult is because it's not, just like a mechanical or a technical exercise. It's dynamic and it's creative, and you need to constantly be thinking and reasoning and thinking and theorizing. So in that way, yes, it is challenging, but it's also incredibly interesting. I love qualitative data and working with it. So what's data analysis? So the object of analyzing qualitative data is to determine the categories and the relationships and the assumptions that inform the respondent's view of the world in general and of the topic in particular. You can hear that's a quote from McCracken. So what you want to do is you want to step away from the mountain of data and try and start to organize it, that you can see the key themes that emerge there, the categories, the relationships, the assumptions. So with qualitative data analysis, you need to make peace with the fact that it will take plenty of time. There are no shortcuts, and you need to have energy to do it. Now, coding and analysis, these are not synonyms, but coding is a crucial aspect of analysis. So qualitative data analysis isn't something that you just do right at the end of your research project. I think you need to think about it as something that's constantly happening. So even say you're doing your interviews over the process of 2 months, every evening after you've done interviews, then you are making notes and your process notes that you're taking. That's already steps in your analysis. part of that activity of thinking what is emerging from your data. So coding is a specific step in your analysis, but analysis happens throughout. So, and even if you're not involved in a formal analysis of the data at the initial stages of your research project, you're already starting to think about what makes sense and what kind of codes or categories or themes could be used. And I think when you start doing your research, you'll see how this happens. But what is coding? So coding is an important step in the analysis process. So, so say you do 20 interviews and you transcribe them, and it's 15 pages of transcription per interview. You're sitting with 300 A4 pages, single spacing of data, which is really interesting to read, but you can't put those 300 pages in your dissertation. So, and they're not organized in a way to help the reader understand the phenomenon that you're studying or the social issue that you're describing. So you need to systematically analyze your data. Now, coding is a way of categorizing the data in kind of a systematic way. So you're cutting it up and pasting it together, kind of thing. Codes or categories are tags or labels for allocating units of meaning to descriptive information compiled during a study. So we have kind of two ways that we approach this. You get hand coding, so that's where you actually sit with a printout of your transcription, for example, and you're highlighting and you're using post-it notes and you're using different colored pens. I've seen people that actually cut out those pieces and they stick it up on the wall and move it around in different ways. And that's how it used to be done. Everyone used to do it that way before we had computers. But what we tend to see more now is electronic coding, because there's great software and also free software out there. I use Atlas TI. Just for some other reason, I started using it years ago. It works really well for me, but there's good free software too. So the positives of electronic coding is that it's easier to kind of find and fit your data in different ways. You have a lot of control. You can share it easily with others. It's faster than sitting with highlighters. And if you have good software, it really just helps the analysis process. Negatives of electronic coding is it takes time, and sometimes just figuring out the software just takes you so long. So I think you need to think about what you have. If you're only doing 8 interviews, then hand coding can really work for you. It also depends on the analysis methods that you'll use and your research design. Also, if you don't have the money, but like I said, there is a lot of freeware out there. Sorry, I'm hurrying through this a bit. Inductive versus deductive approaches to coding, and I referred to that earlier today as well. Now, with deductive coding, so deductive approaches, it's not just a coding issue, it's now how you approach your analysis. With deductive approaches, you start with a theory. So my theory is people who are born in winter are just more depressed for the rest of their lives. Like, I'm really just making stuff up now. So, and now I interview a lot of people that were born in winter, and then I look at the transcripts and I code for everything that is supporting that hypothesis that I have. So the idea is it's kind of like a top down. I mean, this was now a really stupid example that I used. But you look for observations that support your specific hypotheses. And so you're testing your hypothesis through the data. So it's with a deductive approach, you have a superset coding sheet, for example, during your coding process, and you just code for those certain things that you identified as being important to the hypothesis that you're testing. With an inductive approach, you start at the bottom. You start with the data, and you're literally seeing what's there, and you're making your codes based on that. So you're letting the data lead you. So you with deduct, you're moving from these specific observations to broader generalizations. Now, deductive and inductive, it really has a very different feel. I like inductive approaches. I think because I do a lot of research around very messy, sensitive, loaded topics. I think also I do a lot of work with marginalized groups that do not have a lot of voice. So inductive process is for me a way of giving voice to the population group that I'm working with, that I am not determining the categories in which we analyze the data. We're listening to the people that I'm speaking with. But it will depend on your research questions, and it will depend on and you can also do a hybrid. I often use a hybrid, so I kind of start with a coding sheet, but then I add codes as I look at the data and I see there are gaps. So yes, then coding sheets, I'm gonna kind of just, coding sheet is literally your list of things that you code for, and that you can change it, and you can be it inductive. So you start without one and you make the codes as you go along. In this regard, I really want you to think about your research question, look at the nature of your data, and then look at your personality. So, for example, I once did this project for a UN agency where my data set that I had to analyze qualitatively was 8,000 pages. So it was such a massive amount of data that I had only about 10 codes. And then I coded just for the 10 things, and then I looked at the outputs for each of those codes, and then I started subcoding that. And that worked because it was just such a massive amount of data. If I had to have a lot of codes, it would have just killed me. But if I'm analyzing only 8 transcripts, then I can start with 30 codes because it's not that much data. So you can, and I do think it also depends on your personality, what works for you. And if you have one code and it gets to have so much content, you can always add subcodes and just code that output again. It's 3 o'clock. So I think this is my last slide. So around limitations. Quickly, sorry guys. I love doing qualitative research, and I think there are so many strengths to this kind of data and this kind of analysis. I think often within academia, there's a bias towards quantitative data, and we're not always honest about the challenges and the limitations of quantitative data as well. I think that it's most often, when we see bad qualitative research is where a researcher tries to make the methods and the data do things that it's not supposed to be doing. So, for example, like I do interviews with 5 teachers at one school in Somerset West, and then based on that, I make these definitive statements about the state of education in South Africa. So my data doesn't fit my analysis and my conclusions. So the different kinds of qualitative research designs and the different kinds of qualitative methods, they all have their own limitations, strengths and limitations. And I can't discuss all of it now, but kind of if I'm highlighting key limitations of that of qualitative research in general, is this idea of the objectivity of the researcher. You have to be very intentional around how you work with your data to try and limit as much as possible your own biases to determine how you analyze and understand the data and represent the data. The generalizability of qualitative data. So remember, it's all about specificity, the context, the setting, but that makes it sometimes difficult to make general statements. So if this is now true of Uppington in the Northern Cape, how is it of value to the rest of South Africa or the rest of the world? There are ways to mitigate this. So through triangulation of data, through using different research methods, different investigators, but this is something to keep in mind. And then I can't go through everything now, but the last thing is maybe qualitative research can be time consuming and intense. That's what I love about it. But that is something to really take into account if you're planning your research, especially those of you who are doing it for degree purposes, because I know, you have to register for every year at the university. So to really think about the time implications and plan your research accordingly. Okay, super abrupt ending. I'm now done and we can now do questions. I'm going to stop sharing my screen. Thank you.
Thank you, Lisa. That was very, very good. I think there was quite a lot of questions. The one that I am thinking of is the one that Mr. Picache, I hope I pronounce it correct. How do we separate an incentive from a bribery? For example, you're interviewing school learners after school, then you buy lunch or give them transport fare for their convenience. Do we need to declare that, or what, do we just leave it out? It's a bit of an ethical thing.
Yeah. Excellent question. Excellent question. So it's very interesting how we see it's changed, I would say, over the last 30 years, where I would say about 30 years ago, 20 years even, there was this idea that you can do no incentivizing. There can be no thank you, because then you're undue influence on participants. Whereas it's now changed quite a bit, especially in developing settings like ours, where so much research is being done with at-risk or marginalized groups, where it's almost now the reverse, saying, how can you take time from people in this way that's unpaid? You have to give some kind of incentive or thank you. I mean, we don't use the term incentive. There's this term, I forget now the term that I always use when I write my ethics applications, but you definitely have to declare it in your ethics application already. When you approach the community.
Compensation, that's what?
Sorry?
That term compensation?
Oh, it could be compensation. There's still another word, but I'm just feeling foolish now that my head's too all over the place. You definitely have to declare it. But I think it's very important to be very clear about the nature of it, to say this is not a payment, it is a thank you. It's a, what is that word? But it's that word that I can't remember. But also then to think carefully about the nature of what it is. So very often in many settings where I've worked, it's been food, but foodstuffs like a bag of rice. I always work with local communities. I always do research where I'm asked by local communities to come and do it. It's not reimbursement. It's something else. I will go and look at my notes and find it later. And then you can email me and I can tell you the word. So I speak with the local organizations about what is the most appropriate way, because there are many settings where you really shouldn't have cash. It would be dangerous for a woman to come to the organization, to their building, if people know that if she comes for the interview, she'll be leaving with money. So we've had foodstuffs. Often in South Africa, people do airtime. You kind of do what's appropriate to this setting. We do, and we always do reimbursement for travel, but that's always separate, or that's separate from the thank you that we give. So I definitely think that is, if you're taking people's time, the very least you can do is something like this, especially if it's a vulnerable group. But very careful in terms of what you explain it as being, and work with local community leaders to determine what it should be.
Okay, thank you for that. Another one from Miss MC. She speaks about subjectivity when having interviews, observing certain expressions that sound not in sync with the verbal expressions. In terms of example, interview religious leader about beings drinking and sense some uncomfortability, but get an opposite response to that expressed by the body language.
This is this really happens, and Ahila, I'm not sure if I heard the question, but is the question around how do we handle these kinds of situations?
Yeah, dishonesty.
Okay, dishonesty. Okay, so I think it's such a good question, and it's so tricky around how to handle it. I will tell you what I tend to do. Again, I think it depends on what your research topic is. So what are you asking questions about? Because I think it will, and it depends on the power dynamic between you and the person being interviewed. I think those two things really influence how you handle it. I always make notes when I interview, when I do anything, focus groups, whatever. I record, but I also make notes. It's actually because of that experience of it raining so hard on the roof of the church in Rwanda, and I lost my day's recordings. After that, I was like, I will always have notes as backups. But in my experience, if I'm making notes, people feel listened to, like I'm seriously listening, and it is also true. So in my notes, I would make notes of where I see, especially if I see a body language disconnect, I would make that note. And also in my process notes that I make after the interview or in the evening, if I only have time, then I will also make notes about that. And then it will really depend on the dynamic that is emerging between me and the person that I'm working with, that I would say I've had situations where I would say, like, you're saying that you know that you're very comfortable there, but if I'm looking at the way that you're sitting, it looks to me like you didn't really like being there. So I would ask it in a non-confrontational way. And I can't think now of a specific example, but I think there could be situations where you could be more confrontational. Again, it depends on the power. But remember your notes that you take, your process notes that you take from when you make notes in the evening about what a session was like, what the dynamics were like. That's part of your research data. So even if you don't confront the person about this dishonesty during the session, you can reflect on it in analyzing your data and writing it up in your study or your thesis or your dissertation. Just because you're not confronting the person doesn't mean you can't reflect on the dishonesty. Maybe also to flag, it's not always dishonesty. We as humans have conflicting and your beliefs. We have these tensions, and it's not always, we're not even always aware of it. So also careful, I think, maybe in terms of how we name that. Yes, okay, I think that's done.
Okay, a last one. From Mr. Musaima, how do we apply research paradigm in qualitative research?
I mean, okay, I think I might not be following.
Do you wish to speak
Question.
up? Just to explain what you need to know, Mr. Musaima? You can unmute. Okay, doesn't look he's coming back to us. I think you can contact Lisa and then
Yeah, maybe
and
your
then
research paradigm is your framework, right? It's that's kind of the bigger picture into which your theories and your methods and your practices, research practices kind of fit. So, I mean, it's a qualitative research paradigm. This is kind of a bit why I'm struggling to answer. If you can email me, I might now be missing something really obvious. I apologize.
Okay. I think the word you're looking for is incentive.
What's incentive? Because someone wrote incentive.
Yeah.
Maybe I'm just imagining that there's this perfect
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you, Lisa. Thank you. I think everybody's agreeing that this is a great opportunity to learn more. If you want to contact Lisa, you have her contact details, and I will ask her to send her slides to me that we can share it with you. So enjoy the rest of Library Research Week. Next week and tomorrow, we actually have Let's Strive for Research Excellence in the Face of Adversity, and there will be 3 sessions as well. So we hope to see you then, and you must have a good evening. And thank you, Lisa. We really appreciate it.
Okay.
Thanks a
Thank you,
lot.
everyone. Bye-bye.
Thanks. Bye.